Celtic turn on the style in extra time to make it to the Scottish Cup final. But can Dunfermline upset the odds in May after they triumphed over Falkirk? Hello, I'm Andrew Petrie and this is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, views and analysis you need on Monday, the 20th of April. Well, now we know who's going to contest the Scottish Cup final.
Nygren, number 6! Number 6! Celtic turning on the style, having done that on so few occasions this season.
4 goals in 6 extra time minutes as Celtic blow St Mirren away, eventually. Martin O'Neill was naturally delighted with his side's late show.
If you'd asked me, we'll end up winning the game in the fashion in which we did do, I would take that all day long, but it was, we had to wait a while for it to happen, but delighted.
They'll face Dunfermline in the final after they beat Falkirk on penalties, and O'Neill will be seeing a familiar face in the other dugout.
It's a hell of an achievement for the club. I mean, we're beating Hibs, Aberdeen, Falkirk. We've deserved to be here, Stephen.
Listen, there's no doubt about it.
These players they've covered themselves in glory all the way through this, and now we got one to go.
And we'll fill you in on the rest of the weekend's drama.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Livingston defender Cammy, Kerr and Times Scottish football correspondent Michael Grant. Gentlemen, we'll start with Celtic's strange madcap win over St Mirren, 6-2 in the end, but a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde performance, I think it has to be said. Cammy, how do you explain that from Celtic? Because they looked so poor in the second half after going 2-0 up in the first, and then it was like a switch had been flicked and the goals just started pouring in.
Yeah, Andrew, it's a tough one. I wouldn't say it's a story of their season because they're still battling up at the top end of the league, but they've done that so many times this season. I think I've watched them a few times in games where you think there's not much intensity to their play, as you mentioned, kind of really lackluster performance, but the quality they've got has, comes to the top once again, and their top players then come to the top and show how good they can be. And it's just, Martin O'Neill will probably be frustrated in the fact that they've not shown that, week in, week out for more. But they've got there, they're in that final, and that is the most important thing. I think especially when you're in those semi-finals, finals, you're maybe not always going to play your best, but these teams always find a way to get there.
They certainly do. And it was 2 veterans that they really relied upon, James Forrest and Kelechi Iheanacho, who were the heroes in extra time. Michael, is there an argument now to be made for James Forrest and Kelechi Iheanacho being in the starting lineup?
There is, yeah. I mean, we spoke to Martin O'Neill after the game and he was asked about both players and obviously spoke warmly about them both. A kind of funny kind of line, he said that Iheanacho had said to him, I'm fit, I'm fit to be playing every time. And he kind of smiled and kind of smirked a little bit, O'Neill, as if to say, I'm not sure that I agree with that, to be honest with you. So I'm not sure he does think he's as fit as he could be or as fit as Martin would want him to be. But yeah, I think there's a kind of growing feeling, isn't there, that Iheanacho's the best finisher at the club. It's not a great season, it's not a great vintage crop of Celtic strikers by any means, but Iheanacho has that quality at his best, and he's had a great career. James Forrest, as you say, came on as well and was really instrumental in the performance. I agree with Cammy's assessment of it. They play in they blow hot and cold, Celtic. They gave St Mirren a lot of hope, and St Mirren capitalised that. St Mirren were good, in the second half. They really took the game to Celtic, and Mandron was an almighty handful for the Celtic defence, But again, they come through and 4 goals in 6 or 7 minutes. Incredible. It was like hitting a turbocharge, and just suddenly the goals flow, and suddenly St Mirren looked in disarray, and then like the blink of an eye, the game is away. The game's gone,
And you mentioned Celtic's kind of striking conundrum, I suppose. It was Dyson Maeda who started up top as the number 9 at Hampden, and he was singled out for praise by Martin O'Neill. Of course, he scored that goal, I think it was 55 seconds into the game when he closed down goalkeeper Ryan Mullen. Cammy, was he back to his old self today a little bit, Dyson Maeda? And why is it that we've kind of seen him hot and cold, as Michael said, the rest of the Celtic team can be.
Yeah, listen, he was better again today. I think that, as you've said, he's probably not had the season that he did. I mean, it was an incredible season he had last season. Absolutely incredible from the left side. He's been probably played in different positions at times through the middle, which is it his most natural one? I don't know. But there's always been that talk with Dyson Maeda as well about his move, maybe down south or abroad. That didn't happen. Is that playing on the mind? I wouldn't expect so. To be fair, he's a professional footballer. He's a top pro. But that's what I mean. Everyone thinks footballers are inhumane. They're human beings. At the end of the day, they're going to go through tough periods. Even at the top level, they're going to have tough periods. But listen, he looked incredibly sharp today, and certainly more back to his best.
We've focused on the positives really for Celtic there, but at times in the first half, obviously they scored really early, but mainly in that second half, was there quite a lot that would have worried Martin O'Neill, Michael, and worried Celtic fans as well?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I overheard a couple of them talking about the game on the way out of Hampden, and they were saying, what a rotten 90 minutes and a brilliant final added 30, Yeah, I mean, I thought they were a bit. I thought they actually started pretty well, Celtic. Not obviously the score early, but I thought some of the early play was really quite crisp and fast, and the pressing was good and the counter pressing was good, and I thought, okay, that looks like Celtic are going to be on it today, and then they just kind of fell out the game a little bit and gave St Mirren a foothold in the match. So they started to kind of turn around a lot, and instead of hitting the box, they were kind of turning around and playing kind of safer passes. At times, the fans were kind of groaning a little bit. When Ralston scores a goal at the end of the first half, you think, well, okay, it's not going to. They're not going to get punished for this. It looked at that point like 2-0 was going to be game over, and they would manage it out. Didn't go that way because St Mirren came on so strongly. So it was anything but convincing 90 minutes over the regulation time, and again, you're losing 2 goals, and they didn't look like they could handle the physicality of Mandron at the goals, and also some of his other play was excellent as well,
And I think we've got to point out the only team that Celtic have beaten in 90 minutes in this Scottish Cup run this season is Auchinleck Talbot, which is quite mad considering they've gotten all the way to the final. We've also got to talk about St Mirren. They were really, really good in that second half, but it just looked like they ran out of legs a bit. And all this with a 17-year-old goalkeeper making his debut, Grant Tamosevicius, in the sticks when Ryan Mullen went off injured. Cammy, just talking about that St Mirren team, what have you made of them under Craig McLeish in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, they've certainly been a different outfit. I know Stuart Taylor, the assistant from his time at Dundee, he's went in and obviously as assistant there. And listen, he'll be wanting to put his own stamp on it. He's a fresh coach with new ideas, and he'll be wanting to make his stamp on the team for going forward. I believe it's to the end of the season he's got it. I could be wrong. But then he'll be wanting to do his absolute best to make sure he's in with a shout at getting the job on a longer basis. So listen, St Mirren, as you say, I thought were good value. They just ran out of steam. And listen, they are a strong team, and I think, coming in the coming weeks in the split, they're a team that will be okay.
And that's it. I think Craig McLeish has been quite unabashed about the fact he wants this job full time. He clearly is trying to put his stamp on the St Mirren side. Michael, did we see that again today, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take Celtic to extra time, if you're in charge of St Mirren, you take Celtic to extra time, you've done well. You've had a good day at the office, although the game ran away from them. And the scoreline, I don't think the scoreline is really reflective, of the afternoon. And Craig McLeish himself said that he felt the score was harsh on the young goalkeeper, because he conceded 5 goals, but he made big saves, and I thought, from our vantage point in the press box, it looked like he handled the game. It handled the occasion. I remember there was a kind of early moment where I think it was Donnelly gave him a kind of short pass back. It was under hit, and it suddenly was under pressure, and he came racing out and thumped it, and thumped it away, and the supporters really liked that. And Donnelly put his hand up to say sorry. I dropped you one there. And that was good. And he made saves from Nygren and Maeda, and then later on he made other saves. So yeah, I mean, you could question him at a couple of goals, but the kid's 17 years old, and to be thrown into it, on Thursday Shamal George is going to be playing, and then he gets injured in training, and then Mullen is the goalkeeper, and so what are the chances that the two keepers ahead of you are both going to get injured? So yeah, I think he can hold his head up on his afternoon and his contribution to the game.
Yeah, I totally agree. Grant Tamosevicius, remember the name, potentially a Scotland goalkeeper in the future. Right, on to Saturday's semi-final, in which Dunfermline edged out Falkirk on penalties. The obvious talking point is that Neil Lennon is back to face his former club in the final, but let's talk a little bit about his reaction to the win. Michael, we've been watching Neil Lennon for a long time in Scottish football. I don't think I've ever seen him quite as emotional as he was after that penalty shootout.
Yeah, he was down on his hands and knees, wasn't he? Kissing the turf or whatever he was doing, Yeah, he's good value, Neil Lennon. He's a consistently entertaining manager, and he speaks well, and he speaks passionately, and he's opinionated and he's articulate with the media. But that's all well and good. But the key thing for Dunfermline is what an achievement this cup run has been. Beat Hibs, beat Aberdeen, and beaten Falkirk. That's 3 Premier League teams they've overcome. And I thought they were the better team. It wasn't a great game. Neither team dominated the other, but you've got to remember that Falkirk are a top 6 team, and they've been one of the teams of the season in the top flight. And they just never really got going, and some of that was down to Dunfermline being able to kind of contain them, And second half, Dunfermline could have easily won the game before it went to penalties. The young Lucas Fife had a couple of really good chances. Callum Morrison had a brilliant chance right at the beginning. So no qualms, and even Falkirk, who their fans obviously loathed, Dunfermline fans, I think if they were being honest, they couldn't argue that their team had done enough to win the game.
Exactly, and like we say, Neil Lennon, we saw him getting so emotional. I think he's obviously had a tough personal year. He's lost his dad, Jerry, fairly recently, and he was really emotional talking about that in the post-match. It was, really interesting to hear and see that side of him. But Cammy, you'll have played against Neil Lennon teams. How has he changed their fortune? What has he done to make them so hard to beat? Has he put his style, his imprint on them?
Yeah, he has, but from what you hear, it's the belief that he installs in his players. I think that's such a massive thing in football now, and I think that with the way that the game's going, I think sometimes we forget that it's the man management style the man management that is the most important. Again, I go back to the human aspect of it. We're humans. We want to be told that we can do things, want positive, admiration, all these things. And I think he must fill his players with the absolute belief, because the way that they went out yesterday, as you say, I know it wasn't a great spectacle to watch in terms of a game for the neutral, but you could just tell that every single player out there for Dunfermline had his back, he had their back, and that's what football is about at the end of the day. And as you say, it was good in a way to see him so emotional, because again, I think football's lost a wee bit of that, people being honest in the way that they speak, and he wears his heart on his sleeve, and I love to see that as somebody that obviously plays in football. That's what you want. That's what you want, a manager that's so honest and up front. And yeah, look, great day for the Dunfermline players and all their supporters.
It's funny you mention Neil Lennon being so honest. I saw him in the Premier Sports post-match saying that he knows that his boys can go off a cliff just as easily. So I don't know how his players would react to that. But realistically, Michael, what do you think Dunfermline's chances are in the final? The talk is obviously Neil Lennon against Martin O'Neill, master versus apprentice, I suppose, if you like. But should Dunfermline be quite confident? You mentioned the teams they've already beaten. Why not Celtic?
Yeah. I mean, and listen, I kind of wrote this for the paper at the game that Neil Lennon will have watched the extra time and felt a chill running up him, because that's what Celtic can do. And let's be honest, they could do that to Dunfermline. But he'll also have watched the second half in particular and thought, yeah, I can see how we can hurt them. There are things that St Mirren were able to do that Neil Lennon will think that his team is able to do, and they will go into the final with that belief that you've beaten 3 teams in the in the three Premier League teams this season, and also that Celtic have struggled so much in games against all sorts of sides, So it's not by any means a gimme for Celtic. Having said all that, I think it's going to be a big, big task for Dunfermline. You're right. The whole build-up, the whole narrative of before the game will be about Lennon against O'Neill, and we'll write and read and broadcast about their great times together at Celtic and so on. But it will stop counting once the action starts, and it'll become a real trial for Dunfermline, which let's see how they come through it. The other thing, Andrew, is that it's going to be a really challenging period for Lennon in terms of his team and the title run-in, and how he handles those fixtures, how he approaches those fixtures, prioritising playoffs and keeping players fresh for the final. I think if I'm right, if Dunfermline were to get to the playoff final, the games would be immediately after the cup final. I think it would be Saturday, Tuesday, then Friday. I mean, that is really a formidable set of fixtures, but of course they'll want to be in them.
They absolutely will. Let's just talk about Falkirk briefly, Cammy. A really unrecognisable performance from them. I think John McGlynn said as much in his post-match. Is that worrying for them ahead of their top six? We talked about St Mirren running out of legs. Have they maybe run out of steam a little?
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one to judge. I think Falkirk have obviously had a tremendous season. Cup semi-final, top six. And sometimes when you're on that high, it sounds pretty ridiculous to say, but it can just catch you off. Did they go into it thinking it was going to be a lesser opposition because they're in the lower league? I don't know. I don't imagine they would, because John McGlynn is a top manager. He's very thorough in his approach. But as you say, it was just a total different performance than what we've seen from Falkirk this year. As you say, it was slightly lacklustre, almost ran out of ideas at times. But I go back to it, that can happen. That can happen in football. It just sadly for Falkirk and all their fans, it turned out to be on the cup semi-final day against Dunfermline.
Well, Michael, you mentioned the Championship. We'll talk about that. St Johnstone could clinch the title against Dunfermline on Tuesday night after Partick Thistle dropped points on Saturday. Are you expecting the Saints to do the business, especially after Dunfermline are maybe a bit tired coming off that high against Falkirk?
Yeah, I think they've got two chances this week, haven't they? They've got Dunfermline on Tuesday and then Raith Rovers on Friday. I think St Johnstone are in a terrific position. Their goal difference is miles ahead of Partick Thistle, which is an extra point. The one win to guarantee the title and promotion, and they've got 3 games left. They haven't lost a league game since January. I think St Johnstone will be back in the Premier League by the end of the week.
And finally, there was another draw for Scotland against Belgium in the Women's World Cup qualifying. They sit top of the group. They got off to a very good start. 2 wins and 2 draws. They take on Israel in June in a double-header. Cammy, has Mel Andriata maybe changed the mood around the national team a bit? I was doing the game last night and we were talking, and Emma Black was saying, sometimes it was a bit of a slog watching Scotland under Pedro Martinez-Losa. That seems to have changed a bit.
Yeah, there seems to be a little mindset shift, I think. There seems to be a bit more positivity coming out of the camp. They're obviously sitting well placed. And Belgium are a good outfit as well. Very well placed outfit. I think they're 18th in the world rankings.
Yeah.
So yeah, listen, no mugs at all. So they just need to keep doing it. I think obviously they're trusting in the manager they have now, and the squad they've got are improving, camp by camp, that they're there. So they just need to continue on where they are, and they'll reap the rewards.
Fingers crossed. We'll be keeping an eye out for that. Right, that's all we've got time for. Remember, we're here with new episodes of the Scottish Football Podcast bright and early every day, so to make sure you don't miss out, subscribe on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on your phone. Many thanks to Michael and Cammy, and thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.